The real question is whether law school is actually still worth it in 2026. Not can I get in, or do lawyers still make money, or is AI replacing lawyers? The real question is under what conditions does law school actually make sense anymore? Because here's the uncomfortable truth most people don't hear until it's too late. Law school is no longer a universally safe move anymore. It is an investment that's worth it for some folks, but not for others. For some people, it leads to elite outcomes, strong careers, and financial freedom. But for others, it quietly becomes six figures of debt, limited options, and a whole lot of regret. And usually, the difference between those outcomes is decided before you ever step foot on campus. Now, the reason this question is showing up right now is because clearly something has changed. Recent college grads have higher unemployment rate than the general population for the first time on record. Entry-level white-collar jobs are disappearing at scale, and AI is doing work that used to belong to junior associates like research, drafting, reviewing, and summarizing. So companies are naturally responding to rational incentives. They're hiring fewer junior level attorneys, they're demanding more experience, and they're shrinking the bottom of the ladder. And so, what is a smart, anxious, capable grad to do when the job market feels hostile? You want to look for structure, you want to look for credibility, you want to look for a path that still means something. And so that's why law school applications are surging again this year, 50% over the past 2 years. And so the key point most people miss, though, is that this means competition and the associated risk just went up. Most people ask, is law school worth it? But that's the wrong question. The right question is, when does law school become worth it and when does it become a trap? Because law school outcomes are becoming increasingly bimodal. There are some students who graduate with strong options for jobs and manageable or zero debt. But there are other students who graduate with limited leverage and crushing financial pressure, massive debt. And hard work alone is not the differentiating factor, meaning it's not the thing that separates those groups. What separates them is timing and leverage. Law schools are under real pressure right now. There is volatility in the rankings, there's more scrutiny of bar passage rates for their students, they're under increased pressure when it comes to reporting employment outcomes for their graduates, and their universities are putting them under increased budgetary demands. So they can't afford to have a weak class of students, they can't afford for you to fail the bar, they can't afford for you to not get a job because it makes them look bad. And so admissions is no longer asking, is this applicant interesting? They're asking, can we rely on this person to have good outcomes and represent us well? Can this student handle the academic workload? Can they pass the bar? Are they going to be able to get hired? And will they protect our numbers that go into the US News rankings? And everything else is secondary. So that's where leverage enters the picture. Law school is only worth it if you control three things: where you get in, how much you pay, and what options you have after graduation. And the single biggest lever affecting all three of those is your LSAT score. It's not your undergraduate major, it's not your work experience, it's not how compelling your personal statement might feel. The LSAT is the single standardized metric that is comparable, it's predictable, and so a high LSAT score signals academic reliability, the probability that you'll pass the bar, your odds of employment upon graduation, and how you will protect their status in the rankings. And that's why law schools compete for high LSAT applicants. That's why scholarships exist. So when a law school gives you a scholarship, it's not out of the kindness of their hearts. They're buying certainty about your outcomes and how you will represent them in the rankings. But of course, there are cases where law school is not worth it. If you have to attend at or near the sticker price, if you have weak negotiating power to get those scholarships, if you're relying on figuring it out later, and you're betting on outcomes instead of engineering them, that path would expose you to debt without any leverage, fewer job options, greater vulnerability to AI-driven job compression. And so that's the version of law school that most people end up regretting. But law school will start to make sense for you when you enter with admissions leverage based on your numbers. You can reduce or eliminate debt to pay tuition. You preserve your optionality for post-graduation. And so you're graduating with bargaining power, you're not desperate. But that version of law school and that outcome is built before you enroll, not after you enroll. And the leverage that you get from your LSAT score is what makes that version of law school possible. And right now, despite the increase in applicant numbers, law schools are still competing for stronger applicants because they need stability, they need predictability, and they need numbers they can defend. So that creates a short term window for you. If you can bring a strong LSAT score to your applications, you are still a valuable commodity. You can negotiate and you can choose among great outcomes. But once application pressure stabilizes, and it will, the leverage is going to collapse and schools will be admitting more students at full price. And that's when law school becomes risky again. And I know there are concerns about artificial intelligence, and it's not replacing lawyers wholesale, though. It is compressing junior roles, however, and so that means that future lawyers need to demonstrate judgment earlier. Of course, AI can draft contracts, it can review documents, it can spot patterns, but it can't read between the lines or handle ethical ambiguity. It can't build trust under pressure, and it can't make high stakes trade offs involving people. Law is the exercise of judgment under constraint, and that is exactly what the LSAT tests. Most people think the LSAT tests intelligence, but it doesn't. It measures your discipline, it measures your ability to study for it, how much you can put into the process. And students don't improve at the LSAT because they got smarter. They improve because they learn how to slow down, to question assumptions, to stop reacting emotionally to arguments, and they think structurally, they engage critically and skeptically. And when that happens, they raise their scores. And when you raise your scores, you get more scholarships, you reduce your debt, and your outcomes improve. It's just simple math. So law school is not automatically worth it. Don't trust anybody who says it guarantees you a six-figure position, but it can become worth it when you enter with leverage. So there are two types of applicants right now entering the law school application pool. You have applicants driven by momentum who apply because the job market feels bad and they're just hoping for the best. Then you have other applicants who are leverage driven, where they optimize their LSAT scores first. They control the cost of law school so they can engineer desirable outcomes. But only one of those paths will hold up in this AI disrupted, oversaturated market. And so if you're asking whether law school is worth it, you're actually early because most people aren't even thinking about this yet. But the real mistake wouldn't be going to law school, it'd be going without leverage. This path isn't just about becoming a lawyer. It's about becoming the kind of student who can think clearly under pressure and can shape the outcomes instead of inheriting them. And right now, that choice is still available, but it won't stay open forever. So you want to make it a decision, not a gamble, by getting the best possible outcomes, by engineering them through getting a higher LSAT score. And so if you'd like my support, getting that LSAT score up, getting better outcomes, whether you're taking the LSAT in April, June, August, or beyond, I'm offering free private one-on-one LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring lesson with me is unpluggedprep.com. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. Open offer to everybody watching this now or later. I'm happy to meet with you personally, help you craft your plan of attack whenever you're taking the LSAT. And if you find these lives helpful, of course, I do these every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, wherever you're watching it right now. I'll be there most weekdays, but tomorrow we're doing things a bit differently because of the January LSAT score release. Rather than going live at the usual time of 2 p.m. Eastern, I'll go live at 8:45 a.m. Eastern time because scores come out 15 minutes later at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I'm not just going to go live for 1 hour, I'll go live for at least a couple of hours to help folks who are retaking plan their next steps for April, June, or beyond. So make sure to tune in tomorrow, 8:45 a.m. Eastern, and I'll be out live for a couple hours. Now, I see some questions coming into the chat here. I'll get to as many of those as I can. Feel free to keep them coming. Thanks for dropping them. I see that Charisma Boss is asking, would studying from this week onwards for an LSAT in November be enough time to get prepared? Yeah, I mean, that should be plenty of time, more than enough time, I would think. I recommend typically at least 2 to 3 months, but ideally 5 to 6 months to reach your fullest potential. And so, assuming that you're starting the LSAT prep in early February, that gives you what, 9 months? Plenty of time to get a top score. whenever it comes to timeframes, that we want to look at your starting score, your goal score, and your time frame. But 9 months is enough time to make literally anything happen. And if you want to talk through what your study plan could look like, of course, feel free to book the free tutoring with me through the link in my bio, and we could talk through it more. I see Kale Gord's asking, can you explain the best time of year to apply? Well, applications open in early September, typically September 1st or September 15th, and that would be the optimal time to apply. So I would say, ideally, you take the LSAT in April or June for your first take, you take it in June or August for your second take, and then you apply right after applications open in September. When you apply earlier, there's more scholarship money available. It's a bit easier to get in. However, it's better to apply later in the cycle with a higher LSAT score than earlier in the cycle with a lower LSAT score. So if you could apply with a 180 in September, better than applying with a 180 in February, say, but a 180 is still a 180. It's still a great outcome, right? So law schools ultimately care more about the score you apply with than when you applied. But if you can plan ahead for early in the cycle, it's a great way to go. I see Harrison's asking, do you regret your career choice? No, I mean, I love teaching the LSAT. I was, of course, going to go to law school, going to pursue law because nobody really does the LSAT for fun, right? But after I got my 175, I started helping out my friends and then friends of friends. I majored in political science in undergrad, so I had a lot of fellow poli-sci majors applying for law school. And so I started helping them out. They'd buy me dinner. We'd go over LSAT questions together. And then I started helping friends of friends and started charging for my time. And then it kind of just snowballed from there. And I love what I do. 20 years later, I'm still doing it and I'm having a blast with it. It just kind of grew and grew and grew. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, the LSAT continues to be challenging. The more you look into it, the more you realize just how complex it is. There's a lot to learn from the LSAT, and the arguments they're deeper than you might think at first glance. And so I think it's worth respecting the LSAT for what it is. Don't say it's dumb or that it doesn't test anything important. The LSAT is a pretty smart exam, and the skills that you're building through the LSAT, they carry forward into law school and beyond into your legal career. And so you really think to yourself that you're not just looking to get into law school, but you are building the skills that will help you to be successful as an attorney. Now, of course, you can be a great attorney without a top LSAT score. There are plenty of things the LSAT does not measure, to be fair, but just like democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others, the LSAT is the worst exam except for all the others. So it's imperfect, but it's still pretty good. I see Maddie's asking, what do you recommend for a person with a CS background? I have 6 months of tech experience. Well, CS majors tend to do pretty well on the LSAT because CS is programming and coding is logic related, is my understanding at least, right? So you may be predisposed to do well on the LSAT if you're a good coder. And law schools love folks with tech experience because they're very employable, right? Law schools are evaluated based in part on how many of their graduates have a job that requires a JD 9 months after graduation. So you are very employable. And if you have both the CS background and the legal background, that's a killer combo, and you're going to do great in the job market. And you're probably predisposed to do well on the LSAT as well. And so, yeah, I think that at the same time, give the LSAT the respect it deserves, give it the time to get a top score. If you want to talk through your LSAT study plan, of course, I'm happy to meet with you and talk you through your situation. I see Cattle Hearts asking, would a BA in philosophy still help law school applicants under these new conditions? I mean, yeah, a BA in philosophy is a great background to have for pre-law as a pre-law. I mean, just like CS majors do great on the LSAT, philosophy majors also do great on the LSAT. In fact, the people who write LSAT questions have PhDs in philosophy. So you may find you're also predisposed to do well. And ultimately, your career success is a function of the law school you go to, as well as the debt or lack of debt that you're able to take on. And so if you can go to a better ranked law school with significant scholarship money, maybe a full ride, then you have more optionality upon graduating. And that's really going to be the ultimate determinant. When it comes to becoming a successful attorney, ultimately, it won't really matter what you majored in for undergrad, because your grad level degree, like your JD, where you went to law school, will supersede your undergrad degree. So in other words, once you have the JD, doesn't matter what you did for undergrad. I see that my best friend is saying, I just got into Harvard Law School. So for example, if you get, and congrats, by the way, that's an awesome outcome. So if you have a JD from Harvard Nobody cares where you went to undergrad or what your undergrad was. They just see Harvard Law and they're like, this person's going places, they know what they're doing. Now I see that you, my best friend, is asking, I got into Harvard Law School. What should I do? Any tips, please? Well, I mean, I think that you should be the one giving out tips because you got into Harvard Law, great outcome. So I'm curious to know, what was your LSAT score? What was your undergraduate GPA? And what are your goals? I mean, in terms of what should you do at this point? I mean, if you just got in, celebrate. Take a well-deserved break from all this because you earned it. After you take that well-deserved break, then you might want to do a little bit of 1L prep. Just get some familiarity with what law school is going to be about. You could read the book 1L by Scott Turow. You could watch Legally Blonde. You could watch Suits. But I mean, I think that there are some law school prep services out there. Law School Toolbox is a pretty good one. You might want to look into that. They give you some pre-law school simulations so that you are more familiar with what law school is going to be like. It's more about building the skills that law school tests and that you need. So, for example, the IRAC method, issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. So you want to look into things like that. It'll give you a little bit of a leg up when you start law school, but also just network with other entering 1Ls. But not too much you need to do. I think that you've probably done a lot of the work already that you need to do at this point. I see Will is asking, how common are older, mature splitters, specifically low GPA and high LSAT score? They're quite common, honestly. I mean, there are more older law school applicants than you might think, believe it or not. So, in other words, everyone thinks as a non-traditional student that they are unique and law schools are going to look down on them because they're older. And the truth is that law schools love older applicants because they have more life experience, more real world exposure to the law on average. And so you're not going to law school on a whim or for lack of a better option. You're doing it because you really want to be doing it. And the older you are, or the longer you've been out of undergrad, more specifically, the less your undergraduate GPA is going to matter because it's less relevant because you earned it longer ago, and they're going to place more emphasis on your LSAT score. And so if you're older and you have a 175 LSAT, that's a great position to be in, and law schools are going to love you, of course. And they're going to place more emphasis on your LSAT score than your GPA, more emphasis on your application essays relative to what they would have done otherwise. And so just, it is what it is. Write the best essays. If you got your 175 LSAT, you're in a great position to get a great outcome. So other questions coming in. Thanks for these. Naomi's asking, is there only one reading section now? So there's actually always been only one reading comp section on the LSAT. You have 2 scored logical reasoning sections, 1 unscored reading comp section, and 1 unscored extra section of either logical reasoning or reading comprehension. That's the current LSAT format. There used to be a logic games section. They removed it after the June 2024 LSAT and replaced it with a second logical reasoning section. The other big LSAT change in recent years that actually occurred just earlier this month is they removed the dual or comparative reading comp passage for some test takers. And so some folks are getting just 4 single passages and some are still getting the 3 singles and the 1 dual or comparative. But that's the only real recent change. And ultimately, it doesn't matter that much because reading comp is still reading comp. And the previously administered exams that are available to you on LawHub Advantage are giving you 59 numbered exams in the current LSAT format. Plenty of material to study from. I see Naomi saying, I'm taking my LSAT in April, scoring a 140 on my practice tests. I mean, you've got 10 weeks. That's plenty of time to improve your score significantly. And so you want to think to yourself, if you're at a 140 and say you want a 160 or 170, you could afford to spend, say, 3 weeks building your foundation, 3 weeks working on pacing and endurance, focused on individual timed sections, and then another 4 weeks on full-length timed practice tests to build up your endurance. And what we're doing for students in our programs who are taking the April LSAT is we're taking our standard 4 to 5 month curriculum and we're compressing and accelerating it into only 10 weeks by giving you live coaching 7 days a week. And so if you want to talk through what a more intensive boot camp style approach could look like for you, you could book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer for everyone watching this now or later. Happy to talk through what your study plan could look like. I see Carl's asking, do splitters get scholarship opportunities on the same level as non-splitters. So a splitter, for those who aren't familiar, is so an applicant with a high LSAT score and a relatively lower GPA. So let's say that your LSAT is a 175, but your GPA is only a 3.0. You're probably going to be above the LSAT medians for the schools you're targeting, and you'll probably be below the GPA medians for the schools you're targeting. And that's okay, in part because law schools weigh your LSAT score more heavily than your undergraduate GPA. So better to have a high LSAT and a low GPA than to have a high GPA and a low LSAT. And ultimately, law schools use an admissions index where they input, it's a formula. They take your LSAT and GPA, and based on where you fall relative to their medians, they'll decide whether to accept you and whether to award you scholarships on that basis. Now, it's not really about whether you're a splitter or not a splitter. It's how strong are your numbers in aggregate overall. And so if you had a 180 LSAT and a 3.5 GPA, you could still have great outcomes versus having, say, a 3.6 GPA and a 170 LSAT. So in other words, being a splitter or a non-splitter won't necessarily dictate how good your offers are. It's just the overall, in aggregate, how strong are your numbers in general, regardless of whether one is better than the other. I see RLT's asking, so I hope that was clear, by the way. Feel free, if not, to ask follow-ups. RLT's asking, how do you get registered for the 4 to 5 month program? I mean, so let's say if you're taking the LSAT in June, then you're on that 4 to 5 month time frame. And so rather than going for the more intensive boot camp like we would for an April LSAT taker, for a June LSAT taker, we are going to spread the studying out over a longer period of time. So rather than a boot camp where you're doing live coaching 7 days a week, maybe we'll do 5 or 6 days a week because you have more space and more time to take a couple days off, which is, of course, the more desirable course of action. But if you have less time and you're on a tighter time frame, we just work with what we got. I see Omaris is asking about our study programs. We do have study sessions. So what we do is we give you a combination of different types of prep. So we give you private one-on-one coaching. We give you on-demand courses. We give you semi-private, meaning small group sessions in the evenings. And then we give you a custom study plan as well. That way you're covered with one-on-one, with small group. Then your self-study for, if you're studying at, say, 2 in the morning or 8 in the morning, and you have a random time to study here or there during lunch or whatever, unscheduled, you still have something productive you can be doing. And then we give you tailored recommendations for your study plan as well. And then, of course, we customize the particulars to your goals and your time frame based on where you're currently at, what your goal score is, and how long you have between now and your test. If you want to talk through particulars based on your time frame and your goals, you could, of course, book the tutoring with me and we could talk through it more. Scanning through for other questions here. Thanks for all these. Keep them coming in. Ariana says, I'm going crazy because of score release tomorrow. Yeah, I know. I mean, try to do whatever you can that's productive or not, just to keep yourself busy. We got less than 24 hours. What do you have? We have roughly 19 hours or so till score release. And so binge watch Netflix, binge watch Suits or Better Call Saul, go for a walk, get a massage, take a hot bath, just take it easy. Or if you're planning to apply the second that applications come back tomorrow, that scores come back tomorrow, maybe you want to work on your essays or your personal statement, your resume, make sure your letters of recommendation are in. So whether you want to just do something productive or not is entirely up to you, of course, but do something, anything, so that you're not just thinking about score release. But if your applications aren't totally done yet, then of course that is something that you could do in the meantime. I see Braden's asking, do you recommend taking rest days off during a study program? I'm planning on taking the April LSAT studying 1 or 2 hours a day. So, I mean, if you were in our April LSAT boot camp, I mean, we would give you the option of doing live coaching 7 days a week because it is a relatively shorter time frame and we want to maximize the score that you can get. But I honestly think that everybody can afford to take a day off, at least 1 day off per week here and there, because we don't want you to burn out. You know, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. But also at the same time, I mean, days off become more important the more that you're studying. If you're only doing 1 or 2 hours a day, you might not need a day off. Days off become more important if you're doing, say, 4 to 5 hours per day. That's when it becomes more crucial because the risk of burnout becomes more real. But of course, if you want to talk through the particulars, we could talk more about it at any point. Now, when it comes to score release, there's this selection effect or selection bias when people worry that LSAC messed things up. I'll open my inbox, my DMs, Reddit threads, and YouTube comments, and it's always the same message written 100 different ways. They're saying, I don't get it. Why did my score drop? I didn't panic. I didn't blank out. I didn't walk out feeling terrible, but then my score came back 10, 15, 20 points lower than my practice test average. And if that's you, I want to say this clearly right up front. You're not alone. You're not crazy. And it's not just you suddenly forgetting how to take the LSAT. So I want to talk through what's actually going on behind these shocking LSAT score drops and why it feels so disorienting and what you should realistically do next. And I'm going to address the question that everybody wonders, did LSAC mess up LSAT scores? Now, before we talk about LSAC or curves or scaling, we've got to start with something basic. It's the question of how information spreads online. There's this concept called selection bias, and despite the fancy name, the idea is pretty simple. You've got someone who takes the LSAT and they score exactly what they expected. They don't post about it. Nobody writes a viral Reddit post titled, I scored my practice test average and I feel pretty good about it. That post gets zero traction. And even people who slightly outperform expectations usually don't write essays about it. But when somebody's score drops 20 points below their practice tests, that's shocking, it's upsetting, and it feels unfair. And so people rush online to talk about it. So what happens? Online forums become flooded with extreme outliers, those who got massive score drops, weird test experiences, conspiracy theories about LSAC, and speculation about secret curves and hidden agendas. But what you're not seeing are the thousands of students whose scores landed right where their practice tests predicted. Now, that doesn't mean the drops aren't real, but it means the internet amplifies the most extreme cases. So did LSAC secretly make the LSAT harder? You've probably heard that rumor that LSAC made it harder to compensate for changes to the test, or LSAC is punishing people now, or it's due to the cheating scandal, or the curve is brutal on purpose. But my honest take is that LSAC did not say, let's wreck everybody for this test administration. Is it possible that structural changes to the LSAT have made outcomes feel harsher for certain students? Yes, absolutely. Because the LSAT has changed and it hasn't done so evenly. The LSAT used to have the logic game section that many students could eventually perfect with repetition and pattern recognition. Now, for some people, logic games was a score booster, and for others, it was a nightmare. And when the LSAT shifted and they replaced logic games with more logical reasoning, the impact was not neutral. Logical reasoning rewards abstract thinking, ability to recognize traps, and consistency under pressure. And some students do great on this, others don't. So right away, you've got winners and losers, even if the overall difficulty of the test has not changed. But that's only part of the story. The real elephant in the room is LSAT score inflation, and that's the part that most people underestimate. Over the past several years, LSAT scores have inflated significantly. The LSAT is shorter than it used to be, which means less fatigue, more flexibility, and there has been a dramatic increase in approved accommodations for extra time and extra breaks. And all of that pushes scores up. And you can see that clearly in the law school data. Top law schools now routinely report median LSAT scores that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Scores that used to place you safely at the very top of the applicant pool now put you in a much tighter competition band. And that tells us something important. When LSAT score inflation accelerates, LSAC has to respond. But they don't change questions retroactively, of course. They adjust the scoring scale. They tighten the curve. They tighten the raw score to scaled score conversion, which makes things start to feel brutal. Because when the scale tightens, it means that fewer wrong answers separate big score jumps, and small mistakes matter a lot more. So imagine this scenario. You walk out of the test thinking that it felt fine, a few questions were weird, but overall it was okay. And that's true. But if 2 questions went sideways in one section, 3 in another, 1 more in a third section, that's suddenly enough to drop you far more than it would have in the past. Not because you forgot the material, but because the margin for error is thinner. And it feels personal because you studied for months, sometimes years, based on historical expectations, using the previously released LSATs, and you tracked your practice test averages and you trusted that range. So when your score comes back far below that range, it feels destabilizing, like the rules changed mid-game, and I get why that feels unfair. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Whether it should be fair doesn't change what you have to do next. Complaining's not going to raise your score, you've got to adjust. Now, a lower than expected LSAT score doesn't mean you're suddenly bad at the LSAT or your intelligence regressed, you didn't get dumber, and your law school goals are not dead. It just means the test is less forgiving, and that changes how you have to prepare. You can't win by just getting better at medium difficulty questions because lots of people are getting those. The differentiator now is how well do you handle the hardest questions on the LSAT, especially in logical reasoning, because it is the majority of your score. It is 2/3 of your score. That means any gains you make in your understanding of logical reasoning are compounded or doubled across the two sections. And on the flip side, any weaknesses here are amplified across the two sections. So if you're retaking, you've got to narrow your focus. You don't need more random drills or more content overload. But what you do need is more brutal honesty about your weakest areas, weakest question types, and exposure to the hardest variants of those questions and in-depth review. That means you're slowing down, you're dissecting wrong answers until you can explain why each wrong answer choice is tempting and why it's ultimately wrong, why the right answers are unappealing, and why they are ultimately correct. And you've got to be able to recognize trap patterns instantly. It's not doing more, it's doing better. And I know that some folks are thinking about doing a score audit because LSAC does offer them if your score comes back much lower than you expected and you think there was a mistake. But these are mostly a holdover from the paper LSAT era when human error was more common. But now that the LSAT is fully online and digital, a true scoring error is quite rare. Of course, if your score is so wildly outside your practice test range, so extreme it feels truly impossible, you could do a score audit just for peace of mind. But there are a couple of important things to know. One is that the audited score is final, even if it goes down. And almost every single audit confirms the original score. It's just a sanity check at this point, it's nothing more. So here's what I want you to internalize. Your LSAT score is not a measure of your worth, it's not your intelligence, it's not a verdict on your future. It's just a snapshot of your reasoning under pressure on one specific day. And that snapshot exists within a changing system, and you've got to adapt. Now, if your practice test average was higher than your official score, that data still matters because it means your potential is still there. But your path forward now, if you're going to retake, it means you've got to engage in deeper analysis, do harder questions, and execute better. The LSAT isn't impossible, but it has become less forgiving. And so keep that in mind if you want to prepare for a retake. And if you'd like my help preparing for that retake, whether you're taking the LSAT in April, June, August, or beyond, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, or in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer for everybody watching this now or later. Happy to meet with you personally and help you craft your plan of attack whenever you're taking it. And the reason we focus on LSAT prep, of course, is because that is the most important factor in the law school admissions process. To the question I see in the chat, is it LSAT or GPA that matters more? Definitely the LSAT, and you'll see this for yourself looking at the law school admissions indices on LSAC's website. They publish the formulas for almost every law school. You can see how they weight LSAT versus GPA, and out of the 200 ABA-approved law schools, most of which publish their indices, you can see that only, I think, 3 law schools weigh GPA more than LSAT. Almost every single one weighs LSAT more than GPA, which makes sense because the grade inflation at undergrad is out of control, especially in the humanities. And so while you cannot easily redo all of undergrad, you can much more easily retake the LSAT. It's kind of funny how your LSAT scores a single day of roughly 2.5 hours weighs more heavily than 3 to 4 years of undergrad all put together. And so when people say, should I redo this class or redo that class? I say, why not just retake the LSAT? It's another month or 2 of studying. And that retake prep could be as simple as 1 or 2 practice tests a week, reviewing those mistakes in depth. That alone could be enough to get you a higher score through luck alone by maintaining. And then if you actually studied for your retake, imagine how much better you could do. And the LSAT's offered 8 times a year. Coming up, we've got February in just a week and a half or so. We've got April in 10 weeks. We've got June in a little over 4 months. Then we have, last year at least, we had August, September, October, and November, 4 consecutive months. And so plenty of chances to retake the LSAT. And they'll publish the dates for the second half of 2026 probably in the next few months. But at least last year, they were doing those 4 consecutive months. So plenty of chances to retake. And so for folks who want to start law school in fall 2027, I recommend taking the April LSAT as your first take, June is your second take on a retake, or maybe doing June as your first take and August as your second take. Either way, you can then, of course, apply the second the applications open in September of 2026 to start law school roughly 1 year later. And as I mentioned, folks, I do these lives every single weekday, same time, same place, on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever you're watching this. Normally, they're at the same time at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. But tomorrow I'm doing things a little bit differently because of the upcoming January LSAT score release. Scores are released on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Eastern time typically, so they'll be released tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern. I'll be live starting at 8:45 a.m. Eastern so that we can support those who are getting their scores back 15 minutes after that. Then I'll be live for not just 1 hour, but a couple of hours talking through retake prep and LSAT prep in general for folks taking it in April, June, August, and beyond. And so if you find these lives helpful, please spread the word, share this live to your socials, spread the word in Discord, subreddits, Facebook groups, group chats, wherever you're with others studying for the LSAT. I really do appreciate your support. I'm going to end a little bit early today because I'm going to prepare for tomorrow's live. So I'll see you all then tomorrow morning, 8:45 a.m. Eastern time, 7:45 Central, 5:45 Pacific, bright and early. I'll be live for at least a couple hours. I'll see you all then. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care. Thanks for joining.